I just want to catch up because last week we did a whole about 42 minutes on Chris Matthews, and you remember he likes to couch himself as a vehement war critic of the Iraq War, which he was not. He was against the war, but then when anybody else spoke out against the war, he tried to shout them down. Like he called Phil Donahue. He said he didn't like America. He said basically did exactly what McCarthy would do. You're against the war. You don't like America. Mm-hmm. So he did that. We played the clips. And I'm just going to play you one more because I found some more clips. Remember I said how Chris Matthews had scrubbed the internet somehow of all the video clips of him cheerleading the Iraq War, which he did because I watched his show in 2003 and 2004 and 2005. And he was the biggest cheerleader. But worse than that, he tried to impugn the character of the people who were standing up against this illegal war. And, well, first of all, here's what he said to Phil Donahue when Phil Donahue said, you know what, Chris? I think you're a little too cozy with the people you're supposed to be reporting on. He said that's why you don't do that's why they arrest you for fraternizing with the enemy, because once a guy shows you a picture of his kids, you can't kill him. And so here's what Chris Matthews' response to that was.
I've generally been pretty tough on these guys. I don't think it's fair to call me part of the collaborating with the enemy. You know, that's not my reputation. I got a reputation of being a loner, I think, not kissing up to the right people.
Right. Okay, yeah, he's a real tough guy. He's a real cop on the beat.
Loner, alcoholic, it's all kind of the same thing.
Same thing. So here I found this, I got this this is from 2005. After he had just went up to the Christmas party at the White House. Here's what Tweety has to say.
I felt sensitive. I was with him last night, the president. We all went to see the president. You were there, went to see the president for our Christmas. You got to get your picture taken with him. It's like Santa Claus, and he's always very generous and friendly. And I was wearing a red scarf, and I wanted to look a little bit festive for the occasion, look a little preppy. And he came up to me and said, "Look, Matthews, I didn't know you're that preppy." This is the president of the United States after his biggest victory. And he goes, "I didn't know you were that preppy." And I said, "Well, went to Holy Cross, but you guys started with all this stuff. The Yale guys started with all this stuff." And then he started kidding around. I felt like I was too snappy with him. I felt he deserves a little, he deserves a lot of respect for this bet he's made.
Wow. That's him being against the war, Mark. I don't know if you heard what he said at the end.
He deserves a little, he deserves a lot of respect for this bet he's made.
He deserves a lot of respect for the bet he's made, the bet being the Iraq War. Mm-hmm. Meaning that wasn't a bet. That was a lie you told, and to invade a country illegally because you wanted to line the pockets of your friends in Halliburton, Shell Oil, Exxon Mobil, the whole deal. That's what this was about. It was about oil.
By bet, he meant gambling with
other people's lives.
The truth, not other people's lives. Yeah.
So that was Chris Matthews on assignment, finding out just what it's like to have his head up Bush's ass.
Well, I think in Matthews' case, it's because he suffers from blackouts. He can't drink as much as and he never sounds completely sober, ever.
Ever.
I'm not just saying that because he went to Holy Cross.
And obviously, Mark, for that year for Christmas, Chris Matthews gave President Bush his balls.
It's the best Christmas ever.
Yes. Chris Matthews stands up to the big guys in Washington. He teases them about the colleges they went to. Way to go. So here, I found another clip. Listen to this clip. He talks about George Bush again.
Probably the greatest gamble since Roosevelt backed Britain before War.
He says the Iraq War is the greatest gamble since Roosevelt backed Britain in World War II. Big difference between those two things is that in World War II, there was an aggressor. It was called Hitler. They were Nazis. They were trying to dominate the world. So you had to stand up to it. In this one, there was a toothless dictator who didn't have any weapons. And then we went in there, but he did have oil. So that's the big difference. Here, I'll start it again from the top. Here we go.
Probably the greatest gamble since Roosevelt backed Britain before World War II. The president deserves credit. If this gamble comes through, and it's not clear yet, if his gamble that he can create a democracy in the middle of the Arab world and he does it, he belongs to Mount Rushmore.
Okay, and you belong under a gas truck. How about that? This is the guy, because here, you know what? Let me play, because the reason why I'm playing this, and people are like, why are you picking on Chris Matthews? A lot of people, were pro the war, and it's because he said stuff like this. Recently, I'm sitting at home, and Chris Matthews every day last week was saying
Something foreign to this country took over in those years, 2001 to 2003. We were susceptible, of course, teed up after 9/11, and there were people in the government and pushing for it outside, ideologues, all who wanted this war and didn't care what damage it did, including to our country's reputation as an enemy of aggression, a country that fights when one country invades another, fights the invader. This time, we were the invader, and nobody yelled, hey, this isn't our part, this isn't what we Americans do. Well, some of us yelled, but maybe we should have done more, laid out there on the train tracks or whatever you do to sound the alarm of protest in a democracy.
Okay, so there was people laying on the train tracks, Chris. It was Phil Donahue, and you got him fired for his job. Okay, so here's one more. I'll play one more clip. So now, Jack Murtha was the first guy in Congress to stand up, a decorated war veteran, so he knows what war is about, and he stood up against the Iraq war, right? And he said, this is a stupid idea. It's time to bring these guys home. This is an unwinnable. This is bad. The opposite of what we wanted to have happen is happening. And here's what Chris Matthews had to say to guys like Jack Murtha.
This is going to be a very strong political move by the president. He's talking about spending an extra $3 billion for extra economic aid to the new government of Iraq for rebuilding. I think he's going to hold the Democrats' feet to their fire and say, are you going to vote for this or vote against it? I dare you to vote against it. And I think this is the brilliant political move here by the president, forcing the Democratic carpers and complainers to come forward and say, all right, you don't like my strategy for victory in Iraq? Vote against it. Go ahead, make my day. This is Clint Eastwood stuff. I think the president today is brilliantly putting a marker out there and saying to the Jack Murthas and the rest, okay, vote against Reconstruction. Vote against my plan to turn this war over to the Iraqis. That's my long-term plan. You vote against it, and I'm going to nail you. But behind all this, and this is very important to understand, this president has been absolutely consistent in his philosophy.
Okay, so...
Wow.
Well, first of all, how can we possibly understand when he's constantly slurring his words?
He was slurring his words. He was slurring his words. So that guy who called Jack Murtha a carper and a complainer, and how George Bush is going to be like a Clint Eastwood. Look,
well, it's hard to understand sometimes whether he's talking, he's just praising the politics of it, or without understanding the meaning behind the politics, or you know.
Yes, he's exactly what you're right.
So he's praising the maneuvers.
I think he kind of uses
while ignoring what's the mechanisms underneath that.
Yes, Mark.
You know, I like, but honestly, MSNBC. I'm not a huge fan. I mean, I'm a liberal. I talk about liberal politics on my show. You know, in a medium where you don't hear a lot of liberal talk shows, certainly not on the East Coast. And really Chris Matthews is the guy on MSNBC that I normally appreciate. But the picture that you're painting, he really sounds like he's like literally, they say start talking, he talks, they say stop talking, he stops, and he's not exactly sure what happens.
It doesn't. Yeah,
he may actually be drunk. It's possible.
Yeah. So and again, I'll just play it one more time. This is why I went and found all these clips of him denouncing the people who were standing up against the war and him cheerleading George Bush. He was technically against the war. He actually, before the war, he wrote a column and he would say, I don't think this war is a good idea. But he would say it like this: I don't think this war is a good idea, but if you and George Bush want to have the war, I'm all for it, baby, because I love America and I love you and George Bush and I love our troops. And I love ratings. And he loves, exactly.
Well, he's always that way with every president, though. He's, yes. Okay, I oppose this president Clinton in the election, but now that he's president, we got to support our president.
So he did except for Clinton. He made his bones screaming at the top of his lungs about Bill Clinton defiling. Right, he said he defiled the office of the president because he got a BJ, and if that's all it takes to defile the office, I think just about every other president has done. FDR needed the help of his aides if he wanted to get on top. You know what I mean?
Lincoln got blown in the temple.
Defiled the office. What did George W. Bush do to the office?
Exactly. So, and here's the reason why I'm bringing this up, because he's saying stuff like this now. Okay, let's listen to it.
Good evening, I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. Let me start tonight with this. I hated the Iraq War, said so when I saw it coming, have said so since. The only time I
Okay, so there you go. Okay, so he's saying stuff like that. He's rewriting history, and that's why I'm playing that stuff that shows him to be, George Bush, he's the guy should be on Mount Rushmore. He said that. I checked Mount Rushmore. They haven't put him up there yet.